This is a story that begins on the morning of March 11th of 2025, as I am about to commit to something that I have been enjoying not doing. I am about to start a playthrough of Hollow Knight, streaming until I beat the game, and with the minimal homework that I have done, I am expecting this to be a 5 to 6 stream endeavor at roughly 4 hours a stream, because online resources have told me that beating a blind first playthrough of Hollow Knight should probably take around 25-ish hours. Yeah, Thane, but what about full completion? What about 112%? I'm not doing that. Are you stupid? Do you know who I am? I don't like Hollow Knight. I don't like platformers or Metroidvanias. I don't like Souls-likes. Hell, I don't even like Souls or games that are difficult for the sake of being difficult. I've talked about all of this before. Okay, so why play Hollow Knight? Great question. It wasn't by choice. I, like many creators on this platform, use Patreon to help keep the channel afloat, and one of the tiers that I used to run on Patreon came with the ability to request that I cover a game, and someone, private, mysterious benefactor though they be, asked for Hollow Knight.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
I like money. But, knowing that I do not like this sort of game, I expected that this Hollow Knight experience would parallel the tone of my Elden Ring and Factorio videos. Phenomenal games, loved by the masses, that nonetheless were not made for me, and that I would therefore struggle to connect with. I expected to play through Hollow Knight for the first time, get an ending without worrying too much about uncovering every little mystery, make a video to highlight a handful of my favorite elements and talk about how cool it is that things can be valid even if we don't like them, and then ignore the comments on the video as people call me scum for not loving their favorite thing. This is not a joke, it is a personal experience. That is not quite what happened. What happened is that I beat 112% of the game over roughly 85 hours. What happened is that I've had a $330 Hollow Knight Nightmare King Grim statue from 27abyss Studio staring at me from a shopping cart on my second monitor for weeks now. Look, it's in stock. What happened is that I used to be normal. You know? I used to play video games in a normal way, and I said normal video game things. I'd say Cyberpunk is my favorite open world because of the incredible design of the environment. Ouch. I'd say my favorite thing about Space Marine 2 is how it establishes the scope and scale of the universe. I'd say, hey, do you know Final Fantasy Tactics Advance? It's my favorite game of all time. And then I played Hollow Knight, and now I'm not normal anymore. Now I say insane things like, yeah, Radiant Pure Vessel isn't all that bad. I say, thank goodness Silk Song is coming out tomorrow. I say Nightmare King Grim is my ex-husband, but joke's on him, I got the kid in the divorce. I'm not normal anymore. Okay? What happened is that I fell in love with this game. What happened is that I developed a stronger sense of trust towards Hollow Knight than I've ever experienced in any other game. What happened is that Hollow Knight changed me and the way that I experience games, and that means that Thunder request or not, I have to tell you about this one. Okay, that was a lot of energy. Sorry, that's been happening lately. Let's bring it back down for a bit. Hi, I'm Thane Bishop. Nice to meet you. I like to write essays to celebrate the things I love, and for the last 2 months, I've been trying to write a cohesive love letter to Hollow Knight, which has proved to be a remarkably difficult task for me, largely because I didn't expect to like this game at all, much less this much. It is undeniable that Hollow Knight is a marvelous game. It's everything you could want from this sort of experience. It's a game so good that the only thing people want from it is more of it, but I never even thought to care about it before I sat down to gather footage. I'm not trying to be on some elitist shit where I'm too good for Hollow Knight or be a contrarian or whatever, but the reality is that Hollow Knight has this perfect blend of tags and attributes to not just kill my interest, but never allow it to grow in the first place. Historically, I have just never cared about 2D platformers. The only one I would say that I really played would have been like Super Mario World on the SNES, and that was 2 decades ago. Not to say that 2D platformers are kids' games for kids, but that sure is when I played mine. More than that, I don't think I've ever even played a Metroidvania before Hollow Knight. They've just never popped up for me, but knowing a little more about them now, that there is a huge amount of backtracking native to them, I would not have expected to connect with this one so much. And of course, the real difficulty, you might say, is the other half of these tags. I've made my opinion of Souls and Souls-adjacent games remarkably clear over the life of my channel. I have hundreds of hours in the genre, I do not much care for it. Do you need more than that? Tell you what, smash Dark Souls 2, pass on everything else. A bigger problem than all of the rest, though, is this fourth bit: difficult. Look, I don't mind a challenge. I enjoy the chance to play games in ways that ignore intended mechanics. I love getting to define my own experience with a thing, even if it makes that thing more difficult, and I've literally made 2 different videos, each celebrating in some way my love for permadeath in games. I love getting to have a challenging experience with a game as a result of my own definition of my relationship with that game, but when a game presents itself as difficult, it feels much less like creative freedom and more like a game that's going to be a headache for the sake of it being a headache. I need you to understand, I sank so much time into competitive League of Legends when I was younger. If I was looking for a game that was hard for the sake of it being hard, I would just reinstall my abusive ex, you know? So, all combined, there was absolutely no reason for me to expect that I would love this game if all I did was look at it from the surface. Once I actually got into it, however, I quickly began to realize that Hollow Knight had everything I wanted in a game, in addition to all of those previous things, and it nailed the execution of those things I love to such a degree that I was willing to work with and would later come to celebrate all those aforementioned tags and attributes that initially fed into my disinterest. There's a lot to talk about. That's a huge part of why this video ended up taking and being so long, and I've decided that the best place to begin is the beginning. No, I mean like, the beginning. Truth be told, I should have known, I think, that I was going to fall for this game right from the most preliminary moments, and watching back the footage of my 85-ish hours, I can actually pinpoint the exact moment where I think I should have known, where I believe my willingness to engage with this game suddenly spiked, even though I wasn't consciously aware of it. One of my favorite things in games is when I am given total freedom to define my own relationship to the game and its world and its mechanics. It's the kind of thing where, despite not finding the physical world of Skyrim to be that interesting, I keep coming back to the mechanical creativity of Skyrim. Yes, the systems are shallow, they are still remarkably wide, and that is often enough. When you play games, it is not entirely uncommon for one of the first mechanical choices you make to be a brightness slider, typically accompanied by some form of text instruction directing you to adjust the slider until X image in Y place is Z brightness. And what's happening here is that the dev team has a certain idea of what the ideal brightness level is for you to enjoy their game with, for you to quite literally see as the team sees. And I want to be clear, this is by no means a villainous act. I think the devs just want to help guide you to what they think is going to work best. That's fine. But it does mean that I can write 4 paragraphs of text to talk about how cool it is that when you open Hollow Knight, the brightness slider directs you to adjust the game's brightness to your preference. Literally, before you even gain control of a character or make any mechanical choices about your build, you are made a promise in a very quiet way that Hollow Knight is going to be about you defining your own experience with the game as a result of it bending to your preferences, rather than the inverse. Now look, am I maybe reading a little too much into this one minor thing? Absolutely not. No, fuck you. It might seem small, but I fundamentally believe that this is a core tenet that Hollow Knight is establishing, that this is a quiet promise that the game is making to you as the player about what you can expect from this experience. So the question then becomes, can they deliver on this promise? Can I trust this game? Being a Metroidvania, there is a certain quirk to the world design of Hollow Knight. The standard design to a world of this genre is defined by one part as a massive, open, and exploration-requiring locale, and one part restricted, gatekeeping, come-back-later sort of affair. This double backing is a standard in this genre, and it comes with the expectation that when, not if, you hit a wall, sometimes a very literal one, other times a pool of acid or a gaping chasm, you will understand that there is a difference between I am doing something wrong with the tools I have at present, and my tools at present are not sufficient for this task. The latter, of course, implying that somewhere else in the world is a new tool still waiting to be discovered and claimed, so that you might return later, better equipped, to solve this present puzzle. This ended up being a pretty common occurrence during my time in Hollow Knight, a series of problems that I came to call the Great Questions. Literally, how the fuck do I do this? roadblocks that were not skill-based, but rather required certain tools that I had not yet found or discovered. These questions were frequent and befuddling roadblocks during the early hours of my Hollow Knight endeavor, and it's here we see the consequences of that half-and-half style world-building that comes native to Metroidvanias. Knowing that the expectation is that I wander, hit a roadblock, and then just wander somewhere else hoping to find a great answer somewhere, it spawns a new great question. Is this an experience that is going to be worth my time? Exploration in game design is a very complicated thing, I think. It sounds on the surface that it should be simple, but in actuality, exploration done poorly can kill an open-world game. Having a big map to wander around is not enough, and to me, there are two main things an open world requires for its open world, and the exploration native to it, to pay for itself. Those being literal rewards for time spent exploring and opportunities to engage with interesting mechanics attached to my character. And developing these aspects well will provide an incredible amount of trust between the player and the developer, giving the sense that this experience is worth having and engaging with. Green Path is not the first area you'll encounter, that's the Forgotten Crossroads, but for me, Green Path was the beginning of my sense that I was going to enjoy what this was all about. You see, you need to spend time exploring the crossroads for the way into Green Path to become accessible, beginning that feedback loop of exploration feeding into further exploration, and for that to work, that exploration needs to be worth it, and as one of the first areas your exploration can lead you to, that puts a lot of pressure on Green Path to set a good standard, to both deliver on the notion that exploring this world is worth your time, and also double down on that promise by giving reasons to believe that it will continue to be worth your time. Mechanically, it does this by giving you an encounter with Hornet, a reoccurring boss/friend/future protagonist/so we're told, introducing you to an early concept of what boss fights in this game are going to look like, how they're going to feel like. This fight should push your understanding of what the game has given you to work with so far. It should require some thought and patience, and most importantly, it should be fun, even if you don't win on your first attempt. Besides the fight involving mechanics that are fun to engage with, the game does this by flexing some seriously powerful musical muscles with Hornet's theme, which, after coming through Green Path, should not be a surprise. Green Path, the song, has a great sense of whimsy and novelty to it. It never belittles the area that it represents, but it serves to make the area feel welcoming to the player. You should be here, you should be careful because you're not alone here, but you shouldn't be scared. And this same energy is brought forward with Hornet, both the fight and the song. Hornet's energy, again, the song, has this sort of forest ranger vibe to it, this sort of fantastical song that might play when running in the woods tone to it, and it again carries the idea, paralleling Green Path, that you are not here to be beaten relentlessly, but you are here to be challenged. And thanks to the satisfying mechanics of the area and the fight, combined with the music, and with the addition of a new piece of gear gained after the fight, that being the Mothwing Cloak, now allowing you to dash, the combination of Green Path and Hornet serves as a perfect introductory microcosm for the rest of the game. Almost every single area in the game, along with many of the boss encounters, have soundscapes unique to them, and every single one perfectly performs the task of informing the player what the tone and intention of this encounter is. For example, the Mantis Lords. The Mantis Lords are a trio of warriors who exist at the deepest level of the fungal wastes, and it's honestly a little hard for me to be normal about how much I love this encounter. This fight takes the things that Hornet established, builds on top of them by accounting for new tools and upgrades you might have gotten, and presents as, in my humble opinion, the best thing in the entire game. You're used to fighting one boss, yes, but what about second boss? I adore this fight so much for the fact that the duo of lords won't join the fight until you can prove that you're ready for them, meaning that this 2v1 feels less like getting ganked and more like you've proved you're capable of a greater challenge. And the Mantis Lord's theme is this perfect sort of high-energy focus track for a boss fight involving two enemies at the same time, and keeping that theme of music as information, the upgraded version, Sisters of Battle, adds an extra layer of power onto the track because now you're fighting 3 enemies at once. In the same vibe, we have the Grim Troop and the Nightmare King, 2 different tracks for 2 different encounters with Grim, the master of the troop. The Grim Troop, which plays during your first combat encounter with Grim, plays like a sort of stage performance. It feels like a theater song, like the kind of thing that would be right at home in a sword fight from Princess Bride or Phantom of the Opera. Not threatening exactly, but intense, and that intensity is sold perfectly by the drum beat that comes in at a minute 18. And this whole song is also great. I love all of it. If they'd just dropped that drum beat, it would have been great. But as I add the 12,010,286th listen to this track on Spotify, I'm noticing that there is a whole background bit of the song leading to the drum beat. How when the song opens, there's some piano work holding the same beat, and at around 15 seconds in, some strings come in, pick up the beat, add a little more power, and it holds on until a minute 5, when a guitar comes in, picks up the beat, even more power. And so when the drum roll finally kicks in at a minute 18, you're ready, you're waiting for it, you know it's coming, and it hits so hard. The only thing that hits harder is Nightmare King Grim, the upgraded version of the titular Troopmaster and the song that comes along during that fight. There is no build-up in this song, there is no preamble. It is just brutality from moment 1 until the fight is done. The drum roll from the Grim Troop is gone, replaced by something akin to a choir bursting out panicked and rising notes alongside an organ, in addition to the song that turns it from merely intense into downright unsettling. This track is meant to drive home that you are not fighting something that exists in the same way you exist. This is not a quippy fight between Inigo and the Man in Black. This is a fight for your life against a being that understands themselves as greater than you, has the power to back that belief up, and is going to saddle you with a kid after you win. Even when it's just the locales, it never misses a beat. Themes like the City of Tears present the perfect tone, this sort of melancholic sadness. It's the sort of song that perfectly establishes the auditory accompaniment to the notion of I used to be beautiful, I used to be powerful, I used to mean something. It's like both the song and the area are sad that they don't have more to show. Like the very walls and the floors and the strings and the vocals are all trying to apologize to you for not being in their prime anymore. Like they're sorry that time and sickness have ravaged them, but it still carries this hope that maybe, somehow, it can become better again. I think it's important to call out that Hollow Knight's audio and locale combo goes beyond just the music. While doing some homework for this essay and finding a video for Cave Atmosphere Miscellaneous 3, because that's what I do now, I found this great comment from user Alis Nelros specifically highlighting that Christopher Larkin is not just sublime at rendering musical compositions, he is also a master of knowing when not to use that music. Understanding that going from this to this is one of the best ways that you could possibly inform the player that they are not welcome here. Finding this comment from Nelros helped me be more aware of the locations in the game with music and ambiance versus the areas with just ambiance, and the way that those soundscapes informs both the nature of the world and your place in it. And it's not just the soundscapes that define the world, it's the clear and stark visual identity present in every place. I found this Hollow Knight GeoGuessr game, link in the description, because again, that's what I do now, I guess, now that I'm not normal. And even if I can't nail every single exact location to the pixel, it is very, very rare that I get an area incorrect, because with visuals alone, this game has built a powerful sense of personality and identity into every locale, and then that visual identity is compounded upon with a unique auditory identity as well. With each area having such individuality, you might expect the transition between zones to be stark and jarring, like the cut into Caelid back in Elden Ring, or the transition between Night City and the Badlands in Cyberpunk, but the world of Hollow Knight is absolutely full of small, little, as Juniper Dev calls them in her video on the subtle details of Hollow Knight.
There's this space that I want to call a transition room. Like when you go from the crossroads to Greenpath, you'll enter this area. This is one of the most beautiful moments in the whole game, I think, because it's also the first time that you experience this.
And once I heard her say this, I was suddenly consciously aware of them everywhere. And they're a huge part of why I think the exploration in this game works so well, because there's basically no sense of separation between any given locale and the next, which means that it's so easy to just slip into a new area. There is rarely a sense of disconnect between even the most distant places in the world, so it never really feels like you're starting something new or unfamiliar when you're exploring. One of the final tracks I experienced in Hollow Knight was the music for the Pure Vessel fight, and you'll never guess what it's called. I ended up having a lot of time to sit with this theme, we'll talk about that later, and what I've come to is a difficult to articulate appreciation for how melancholic this track is. Despite the Pure Vessel being one of the most difficult encounters I've ever overcome in a game, despite the Pure Vessel having a faster pace to its fight than perhaps any other enemy I encountered during my playtime, the song that plays here is slow and sad. This fight is something of a tragedy. This Pure Vessel is an unblemished idea of the Hollow Knight itself, something that could actually contain the radiance and the infection that plagues the world if only it existed outside of a dream. Hey Thane? What the fuck does that mean? Oh shit, we should talk about what we're actually doing here, shouldn't we? Hollow Knight is a Metroidvania, yes, but it pulls nearly just as heavily from the Souls-like genre, at least for the purpose of its narrative. You see, the world of Hollow Knight is a once great kingdom, now fallen to despair as a result of a great sickness that has claimed both the land and the people who call it home, driving those infected to insane violence, and it's your job as the knight to effect change in the world, though what that will mean is not so clear. Like I said, it is a Souls-ass narrative. It also commits to another big Souls-like classic, that being the big door that can only be opened by collecting the essences of people with big names, you know, the things that all of the Souls-born Eldens do. This big door is the Temple of the Black Egg, and within the temple lives the titular Hollow Knight, though lives is perhaps a bit generous of a verb. A more correct verb statement of the Hollow Knight's existence might be persists in constant agony as both patient and ground zero for the terrible infection that plagues the world due to the moth that lives in its dreams. And the whole point of the game is to open the door and do something with the knight and the moth. And all the rest of the game is just there to influence what that actually means when the time comes. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. We can't even open the big door yet. One of the things that Hollow Knight does that I find particularly interesting is that of the boss and level combination, wherein the level itself is more the challenge and the boss is actually a bit of a formality. This is the sort of vibe that you find in games like Dark Souls with Sen's Fortress. The area itself is such a nightmare of saw blade serrations and snakes, oh my, that when you finally get to the top, you realize that the trade-off for the area being such a rat shit Indiana Jones Scooby-Doo nightmare haunted house is that the boss of the area, please Mr. Gollum was my father call me Iron, is a bit clumsy. He poses threatening, as most 19 feet tall metal constructs with axes the size of your body tend to do, but over the years, he's gained a bit of a reputation for being a real klutz, where if you play your cards right, or just let Tarkus solo him, gravity is happy to be the Golem's very literal downfall. Tarkus! This is the basic format used by Hollow Knight when it comes to its requisite characters with big names whose essences must be collected to open the door. What's remarkable about this format in Hollow Knight, however, is that the big names, those being Monomon the Teacher, Lurien the Watcher, and Hera the Beast, are not antagonistic forces to rally against you, at least not in the traditional sense. The traditional sense in this context, of course, being a man with a dragon for a hand attempting to wombo combo your entire existence. Rather, these dreamers, as they are called, whose combined efforts keep closed the Temple of the Black Egg, wherein the Hollow Knight keeps closed itself to contain the Radiance, are quite literal with their names, and they will pose very little physical threat to you and only once attempt any sort of violence against you at all, if attempting to trap you in an eternal dream so as to hinder your path can be considered violence. Despite this attempt failing, perhaps because of this attempt failing, Monomon, when you reach her, seems to be willing to simply concede her life to you, giving up her seal on the temple. This sentiment is compounded upon by Quirrell, one of Hollow Knight's delightful cast of reoccurring characters, who himself was, and seems to still be, some form of acolyte to Monomon, as rather than defend her, Quirrell will aid you in your attempt to slay this first dreamer. Firstly and actively by aiding you in a fight with Umu, who blocks the way to Monomon, and secondly and passively by not standing against you when you move to slay Monomon in her dream realm. And even though the other two dreamers are not so willing to allow themselves this fate, there is very little for them to do about it should you reach them. Just as the path to Monomon is impeded by Umu, so too are the paths to Lurien and Hera, with Lurien blocked by the Watcher Knights and Hera blocked by the labyrinthian Beast's Den and the Spiderkin that stalk those halls. Make your way to where these dreamers rest, however, and they cannot stop you. 3 dreamers down breaks the seal on the egg, meaning that at your convenience you're free to head inside and make an omelet, as it were, though be warned in a way I was not ready for, this is the end of the game. Within the confines of the now opened temple, there is the Hollow Knight itself, and within that knight's dream, the Radiance, the source of the infection, not nearly as contained as the world might have liked or intended. This is what I will call the 25-hour experience. The game of Hollow Knight experienced in as minimal a time and with as little exploration as needed on a first playthrough. This was all I really intended to do when I sat down to play this game, and to try and make it even easier for myself, I had decided to do this whole playthrough on stream for the same reason that I committed to doing footage collection for Elden Ring on stream. If you do a thing you don't like, but with other people, it's usually way less painful. It worked a treat for Elden Ring, I figured it would work for Hollow Knight as well. And while it did work, while I did have a lot of fun learning this game alongside my stream audience, many of whom already knew this game and therefore got to enjoy the experience of watching a novice learn the things they already know, it did come with complications. This was my first playthrough of Hollow Knight. I was coming into the game as blind as I could have realistically been, and most of my audience was content to respect that I didn't want people backseating, spoiling events, trying to direct me, that sort of thing. Most of my audience. Which is why you're going to notice a certain warning in the top left of some of my footage. Having people try to backseat me was a risk I knew I was taking coming to stream the game for my first playthrough, but I genuinely did not think it would be a thing I needed to address in the video. Day 1 of my stream was great, people were great, and I was slowly building up trust in the game as I began to realize at my own pace from my own experience that I was not going to be fulfilled by just grabbing a quick credit roll and calling it a day. Before day 1 could end, that idea of going for 112% had already begun sneaking its way into my brain. Unfortunately, when day 2 came around, things were a little different. Something had changed, and suddenly I couldn't pay people to stop telling me things, even having established that this was a blind first playthrough, and there were 2 reasons why it was so upsetting. Firstly, what even the fuck? If you play a game like Elden Ring, there is a very real sense to the community that using resources like the wiki on a first playthrough is a thing that invalidates the whole thing. The idea of just being told what to do and where to go is something that, in my experience, draws a certain amount of shame from the community. Elden Ring, so says its players, is a holy union between you and the game, and you should not be leaving room for the wiki or guides. Just wander around and hope it makes sense, I guess. A more intense version of this sort of tone is what I experienced with Outer Wilds. This community is so tight-lipped about the secrets of its game that more than once when I played it and tried to find even the littlest hint about where to go, the smallest bit of direction about what I was missing, I was almost always just met with the most toxic sort of, just keep playing, smiley face, just have fun exploring, smiley face, just go at your own pace, smiley face. Like I hadn't been doing exactly that for 2 hours. I walked away from certain conversations with the vibe that there are members of the Outer Wilds community that would rather you quit the game than have someone help you with the game. So what the fuck is going on with Hollow Knight that I can't even walk into the Mantis area before someone tells me, unprompted and with no request, exactly how many hits it will take with my current nail to beat the Mantis Lords? It just baffles me that a game so built around exploration has a community, or at least a subsect of the community, that apparently wants you to experience that exploration for yourself as little as possible. What really did it though is the recognition that Hollow Knight was a game that promised me an experience that would bend to my preferences. No one could define what this experience was going to be except for me, and when I allowed people to come along for that journey, they tried to take that away from me, and it was crushing to the point where I thought I'd have to stop. And then I remembered that this is my house. Fuck you. I'm setting boundaries, and I'm parading the metaphorical corpses of the people who don't respect me or my space from these castle walls, and wouldn't you know it, that actually solved most of the problem. I didn't end up taking the game off stream, and I'm really glad I didn't, because that meant I got to share one of the best moments I've ever experienced in a game with some of the most invested members of my community. Let me set the stage for that. In Dark Souls, if you go to Blighttown and you go to this tree, you can find this illusory wall. And behind it, you can find this illusory wall. And behind it, you can find the Great Hollow. And the truth to the Great Hollow is that while I find the descent into this pit to be not so bad, I consider it to be such a headache, such an unenjoyable experience to try and ascend the Hollow. I find it to be such an untrustworthy area that even now, as a confident and comfortable Souls player who can beat the game in just 5 hours, I won't even bother with this area. I will refuse to go down into this hole. I won't even think about trying to cross Ash Lake until I have the Lord Vessel and can bypass the return ascent entirely. Around halfway through Hollow Knight, I gained an item called the King's Brand, and even though I didn't know exactly what it was, I knew exactly where to take it, because the symbol on the brand matched the symbol on this door, which I had discovered hours prior. Taking the brand to the door unlocked the Abyss, and it was here that I fully realized what had happened to me with the game. Let me just show you the footage of me entering the Abyss for the first time. Okay, so what the hell's going on in here? But so far, Hollow Knight has been 100% an experience of me being able to just kind of blindly trust the developers in every single aspect and element of the game. So it's like, where am I right now? I have no idea where I am. How am I gonna get back up? Not a clue. It's never been a problem before. I don't expect it to be a problem now. I was able to do this blind jump into whatever was below, not worrying about how I was going to get back up, because there had been so much trust built up by the game's devs. Because there were so many good things encountered in the game, so many instances where it was just fun to press the buttons, so many places before where on the small scale I had been rewarded for making the tiny leap, and so when it finally came time to make the big one, I didn't even notice I was doing anything at first. I have never trusted a game this much, and I think it's important to acknowledge that, because it's the reason I committed those 85 hours to get my 112% completion. One of the things I've come to think about a lot in regards to how I understand games is a concept that I call player-developer trust. It's a sort of handshake between the player and the developer, the notion that you as a person can trust this game with your time, that you can trust this experience to be something that respects you, something that doesn't intend to take advantage of you or waste your time. And this is a really big deal for all games, but I think it's especially important to open world games like Hollow Knight, games that rely on players committing to exploration, and you'll have experienced this even if you've never been aware of it. Let me give you an example. You're playing Skyrim, as I suspect you do from time to time, and you're walking somewhere when you stumble upon a cave. It's not where you're trying to go, you haven't been searching for this cave, but if for no particular reason you decide to go and explore the cave, you're engaging in this particular kind of trust. The trust that this is going to be worth your time, and to my understanding, this particular kind of trust is built off of two main things: engaging mechanics and valuable rewards. Skyrim is not great when it comes to engaging mechanics. A lot of these systems were dated by the standard of their time and have not aged with any particular note of grace. They are perfectly serviceable and are often improved upon by, if not outright replaced, with mods. Ergo, when I play Skyrim, I do not trust that I will be engaging with interesting mechanics. I do, however, trust that whatever the reward is for making it to the end of the cave will be worth my time, because even if I'm, let's say a mage with no experience or skills in two-handed, and I get a big ol' hammer of bonking, I can take that hammer down to the shops and turn it into shiny, clinky gold, and then use that cash to buy new spells, new robes, more potions. You get the vibe. Thanks to this system, it means that no matter what the reward is for this exploration, it will have value to me in some way. Inversely, Elden Ring. Elden Ring has been described before as a gameplay-first experience, and that really shows. So it's no surprise when I say that Elden Ring is engaging to play in a way that Skyrim isn't. Every type of weapon feels unique. There is a sense of identity to my character based on what I am wearing and the weapons I carry and the spells I cast, and I enjoy the physical act of engaging with the mechanics that come with those things. During my Elden Ring stream, I probably cast Lightning Bolt 10,000 times, and it never once got old. In Elden Ring, however, that hammer, the moment it is received in this mage-based scenario, is functionally dead. Yes, you can sell items to certain vendors, but the amount of runes you'll receive for any given item is typically so low that it's not even worth your time to do the menuing to sell the item, much less seek out a vendor in the first place. And realistically, Elden Ring just doesn't have the same kind of economic structure to its world that Skyrim has. So most playthroughs of Elden Ring end with a massive collection of deadweight doodads that you don't even remember picking up. In Skyrim, I trust that my time spent exploring will be rewarded by the presence of an economic system that ensures that a dungeon's reward cannot be useless, but I do not trust that I will be mechanically engaged the whole time. I am not going into the dungeon expecting to have great fun just from swinging the sword. In Elden Ring, I trust that I will be mechanically engaged the entire time that I am playing, but I do not trust that my time spent exploring will be rewarded, meaning that I am less likely to engage in random acts of exploratory behavior in the future. What makes Hollow Knight so special is that the whole time through I felt I was able to consistently trust that I would be mechanically engaged in what I was doing, both from a combat and movement perspective, and that the rewards gained for exploring the world would be worth the effort spent to gain them. I think the highest praise I can give to the exploration in Hollow Knight is to tell you how much the movement reminds me of the Dishonored series. I have talked at no small length before about my love for Dishonored, and how it and its successors are largely built around the idea of perfect movement, with so much effort and design put into every base detail of the game to ensure that the whole world is tuned just right for you as the player to always have something to interact with, regardless of the progression you've acquired in regards to your abilities and upgrades. And while Hollow Knight uses a different sort of system for combat and movement in general, the things that make those systems fun to interact with in specific are largely the same, because both of these games leave me with the understanding that these worlds are designed and built so specifically, every detail hand-placed to be in just the right place, each ability and piece of movement given just the right amount of power, the variable height of the jump, the lengths of the dash, everything down to the smallest detail is always right where it needs to be. I think it's also worth actually addressing the concept of those great questions from earlier, because each of them has their own great answer, and this is a core part of the feedback loop of exploration rewarding the player with the ability to explore further. Whether that be a simple double jump unlocked by the Monarch Wings, or the ability to wall climb granted by the Mantis Claw, or something more extreme, like the Crystal Heart allowing you to super dash all around the world in total defiance of anything even remotely resembling gravity. Maybe it's no surprise that my favorite upgrade came from the Abyss. It's an upgrade for the Mothwing Cloak that you get from defeating Hornet, because it doesn't just let you move through Shade Gates, answering one of the great questions, it also adds iframes to your dash, giving a brief period of time where you can't take damage from enemies. Which means these upgrades aren't just keys to unlocking new areas, they're active bits of gameplay that change how you see the world, how you interact with the map, how you perform the combat. And that third element, combat, is a huge place for payout for exploring Hollow Knight. Throughout the game, as a result of successful exploration, I was granted access to light and heavy attacks with my nail. I learned a variety of different nail arts from masters that offered to expand the swordplay of the combat. I unlocked powerful spells and upgrades for spells, and I eventually unlocked every single charm in the game, acquiring a massive collection of power-ups with individual abilities and unique hidden combos that boost all of those aforementioned techniques to the next level, all of which I could swap out at any bench, giving me total freedom and control over my build and how I played at any given time, and I think I still spent basically 90% of the game just using my light attacks. And you know what? It was awesome. It was great. It felt like I'd found my lightning bolt. I fell so in love with the pattern and the rhythm and the timing and the dancing, putting all of my energy into becoming the one thing Bruce Lee would fear by whacking enemies with this one attack 10,000 times, and it worked. I want to be clear though, it didn't work because the game is just so simple that all you need is one single basic attack to overcome every obstacle, but rather, it worked because the game chose to recognize what I was doing as a perfectly valid playstyle, and then it supplemented that playstyle with upgrades and charms to let that kind of playstyle function just as well as any other kind. And when I did eventually start to mix magic into my repertoire, when I started to find value in that spell sword style of gameplay, that felt equally valid and enjoyable, but also came with the satisfaction of learning how to use a new thing well. And combined with how much I enjoyed the movement, I felt so confident that there was nothing I couldn't do, no obstacle I couldn't overcome, no enemy I couldn't bring low. And that's all very cool, but it's nowhere as exciting as finding a new rancid egg. One of the best things to come out of open world games, in my opinion, is the ability to design your own fun. I've talked about this with things like Skyrim and playing with Juve's original Iron Man concept. I've explored it in Dishonored 2, trying to do a no-powers merciful ghost run. And I've shown off how much I think solo diving changes what Helldivers 2 is all about. And even though I wouldn't consider anything I did in this playthrough to be akin to a challenge run, I still had places to make my own fun with Hollow Knight outside of what the game intended. And perhaps the largest bit of fun I invented for myself, on a whim, was trying to fill my pockets with as many of these nasty little ovals as possible. And the reason for that is that there isn't a reason. Honestly, this was just a joke that got away from me. As a bit, I just presented as progressively more and more excited to find any rancid egg each time one popped up until I realized I was no longer joking. Now, the fact that these items are in the game at all implies that there's supposed to be a point to them, but, I never figured out what that was. In my 85 hours of playtime, I never figured out where to take these, what they do, what their purpose is, so I made my own. The purpose of the rancid egg is to be fun to collect. That is all. I just liked finding them. And before I forget about it, that hammer idea from earlier exists in Hollow Knight in the form of charms. You see, charms are largely what defines your build and your interaction with the world, and there's a lot of them to find and choose from, meaning that just by law of large numbers, your exploration will inevitably lead you to a number of charms that are just going to be totally worthless to you. But to equip charms, you need charm notches, and while you only start with 3, you can eventually have up to 11, acquiring 8 throughout the world. And half of these are purchased from Salubra, who will only sell them to you after you find a total of 5, 10, 18, and then finally 25 charms total. Meaning that even if you don't use a certain charm, that charm still helps you become more powerful. The culmination of all of these things means that Hollow Knight provided this unparalleled ability for me to define my own sense of fun, while also engaging with and enjoying the mechanics and design laid out by Team Cherry when they made the game, and all the while I surrendered total trust to the unknowns still ahead of me, and the full time through I was exploring and experimenting with all of the different charms and combinations therein, as I learned how I liked to solve the puzzles that Hollow Knight left open for me to solve via my own creativity and mechanical preferences. And all of this comes together to mean that this is the hardest time I've ever had writing a script. The last game I ever loved this much was Cyberpunk 2077, and in the interim, I've produced 9 videos on either the game or its genre. It near single-handedly defined the early days of my channel, and I am still returning to it today as I find new things to celebrate. The problem, you see, is that I've had that same level of obsession pulling me towards Hollow Knight right now, which means in my head, I've been wrestling with this game over 4 different scripts and 5 different audio recordings because I want to tell you everything about everything, and every attempt to do so before has left me with this unintelligible mess of words. Let's recap where we're at. Maybe that'll be helpful. I didn't expect to like Hollow Knight because it was a 2D platformer, but Hollow Knight showed me that a 2D platformer can have so much more complexity to it than I'd ever thought. I didn't expect to like Hollow Knight because it was a Metroidvania, but that's just because I really hadn't played any before. Maybe I've spoiled myself on the genre a little by developing an obsession for one of the best ever made as my first exposure to the genre, but that's a problem for later. Right now, I am celebrating. And I didn't expect to like Hollow Knight because it was a Souls-like, but now I can't shut up about it. And a huge part of that is because I recognize Hollow Knight as an experience that somehow avoids all the pitfalls I found in Elden Ring, showing that you can put a Souls-like in an open world and still manage a way for the exploration to be consistently rewarding and interesting. And that's it, right? That's all the concerns I had from the start? Yeah, those three things, right? Those are the concerns? Nothing else to address? Nowhere that I'm gonna need to be vulnerable? Right. Okay, let's talk about difficulty. It has been a very long time since I felt the need to prove myself to a game. To overcome a challenge specifically and exclusively for the purpose of overcoming that challenge. To really push myself to be the best I possibly can be at a game. These days, I enjoy games more for creativity, for narrative structure, for artful world design. But throughout my playthrough of Hollow Knight, 3 different things threatened to lock me out of my 112%, and each time one of them appeared, I was made to make a choice. If a part of the game was just too hard, too difficult, there was absolutely no one in the world who could have forced me to do that part. And honestly, I could have 100% swung a video without completing those things. I could have capped at 109%, made a video about knowing my limits, talked about how Hollow Knight is a game all about you defining your own relationship with the game, and how mine just didn't include that last 3%. Before Hollow Knight, that's what I would have done. But the thing is, I've never trusted a game as much as I trust Hollow Knight. And that trust meant that when things got difficult, I fully believed that overcoming those difficulties would be worth it. So when my struggles meant that something had to change and that it had to be me, I changed. The Colosseum presents 3 different trials, being those of the Warrior, the Conqueror, and the Fool. And while the Warrior and the Conqueror trials were no serious roadblock, crowning myself a Fool was no simple task. White Palace had been a good bit of movement practice, but the trial of the Fool took the idea further by introducing combat on top of the movement mechanics, naturally heightening the stakes and increasing the difficulty, as most people would agree that adding any sort of combat to any sort of movement makes things more tense, like when you find a bear on the hiking trail. This bear was named Wave 14, or as I came to call it, the aerial phase, called such because it required me to be in the air while also fighting, and I struggled with that a lot. I've since been told that the quote intended way to deal with this wave is to pogo on the spike floor rather than hug the walls and achieve short bursts of violence-based flight, but that's the sort of thing that makes me love what I did here even more. Remember, my adoration for the game largely stemmed from the game telling me that it was my preference that mattered for the definition of this experience, and using my preferences to overcome the things I struggled with was deeply rewarding and also a bit of a hyperbolic time chamber. As when I did finally make it past Wave 14 to get to the God Tamer, I ended up beating the final boss of the Colosseum on my first encounter with them, even though it took me like 14 attempts just to get there. I just found it to be such a fun, engaging fight, but I have to admit, I think the way it was designed also really enabled myself and the way that I like to play. Call me a fool, first roadblock down. Nightmare, Nightmare, Nightmare King Grim comes as the final encounter of the Grim Troop DLC and also served as a valuable reminder of why I like to stream certain games. The reason I streamed Elden Ring was because I had recently replayed a bit of the game in the form of a few couch co-op sessions, and surprise, doing an obnoxious thing with my best friends was way more fun than doing it alone, and so I figured, at the minimum, I could maybe get a similar sensation out of streaming Elden Ring as I played through it for footage for an essay. It worked there, and with Grim, it worked again. NK Grim was a serious roadblock, and it was getting rough, just running attempts over and over, knowing that at this point in the game, I didn't really have much else to do, and that I hate to just leave a thing hanging like this. And then a joke started popping up in the stream chat, and by right, I don't honestly remember how it started. It could have been a comment from someone in the audience, it could have been an offhand comment made by me, but the joke began circulating that, boy, this custody battle is getting intense. A joke in relation to the Grimm's Child that the DLC largely revolves around, and suddenly, all the actual frustration was gone. Because how can you be mad at the notion that the story of this DLC is the little knight trying to get their alimony payment from this deadbeat string-bean feeder kid of an ex-husband? It took so much of the negative tension out of the fight and helped remind me that, yeah, this is hard, this is a challenge, it's still supposed to be fun. Hence the music. And speaking of fun, one of the jokes invented over the course of the game was my stream chat trying to convince me to use weird charm loadouts. Not in a backseating kind of way, but more of a we have trained him incorrectly as a joke kind of way. And one of the most reoccurring bits was the Dream Shield. But as I got better at the game, silly loadouts, or at minimum, goofy additions to my loadout, became more viable as I relied on optimal setups less and less, leading to what was maybe my favorite moment of the entire stream. Because honestly, what I can just do is throw on Dream Shield. And this way I won't get hurt anymore. Now I know what you're thinking, Thane, you must be a real silly goose. But honestly, some of those fights that I've done, 1 or 2 hits getting blocked could have won me everything. That was the Dream Shield. The Dream Shield blocked the first one. I want that on record. The Dream Shield got the final hit. The Dream Shield got the final hit. Dream Shield believers stay winning. 111%. Everything came down to Godhome, to Pantheon 4, and at the end of it, the Pure Vessel. I don't think I've ever encountered a thing in a game that was more demanding of me than Pure Vessel. Over 10% of the playtime on this file was Pure Vessel. And I want to be clear, I don't mean 10% was Pantheon 4. I mean that Pure Vessel, practiced alone in the statued halls of Godhome, both on stream for multiple hours and then off stream for still hours more, was over 8 hours of my life. And I ran the whole gauntlet of emotions. I tried explaining to myself or anyone else who was curious how it was going that the problem was the fight itself, that it was so far removed from what the rest of the game asked of the player. The bare notion of Pure Vessel's existence made me question if the rest of the game being good was an accident. Of course, the truth is that I was just covering for not being able to do a difficult thing, and after taking some time and reading input from other Hollow Knight enthusiasts about how, yeah, this fight is brutal, it is a beating, this is a hard thing to do, I came away with the remarkable sense that I wasn't alone. Something about recognizing that even across the years I was not the only one in this struggle made the struggle more manageable. And with that sense of human togetherness in the face of incredible adversity, I, with great effort, did eventually beat the attuned Pure Vessel. And then, for reasons I can't quite explain, I moved on to the Ascended Pure Vessel, wherein the boss does double its normal damage. And when I beat that, for reasons I wasn't ready to understand, I moved on to the Radiant Pure Vessel, wherein a single hit, one mistake is all it takes to fail. I wasn't practicing to get it right anymore, I was practicing until I couldn't get it wrong. Not because the game needed me to, but because I needed me to. Because I wanted to. I'm almost annoyed by it. Of course I am, but now on the other end of Radiant Pure Vessel, I can't really articulate or understand why I thought normal Pure Vessel was so difficult in the first place. I have the memory of negative emotions, but now, here, writing this for you, I remember beating Radiant Pure Vessel and carrying that ability forward into beating Pantheon 4 and claiming that final 1% to reach 112 as the single best feeling I have ever gotten from a game. And that was it. I did everything I said I was going to do. I did everything the game was willing to give me credit for. I got my ending, and like 80% more of the game complete than I think I'd originally planned to. I'd love to tell you the story of struggle and triumph against the final boss, which, fun fact, does not have its own percent, but honestly, the first half of this 112% final fight is a brawl with a lesser version of the Pure Vessel, so nothing of concern if you can do the Radiant Pure Vessel, and the second half of this boss fight is the Radiance itself, though again, this version of the Moth is of little concern after a flawless Pure Vessel. Hey Thane, great video. What do you mean this version of the Moth? Isn't this like the guy? Great question. Anyways, there is a certain sense of melancholy that came with my 112%, and that feeling has persisted in the weeks after finishing the game. I'm sad it's over. I wish there was more. I know there is more, lots more. In fact, the achievements on Steam, The Path of Pain, Pantheon 5, but there was just something so magical about chasing that 112%, that now that it's over, I sort of don't know what to do anymore. The consolation to all of this, I suppose, is that here I am on the other side of Hollow Knight, now aware that there is an entire genre and style of game that I'd written off as irrelevant to my taste that I now get to take another pass at, better understanding what those games want from me. I now know that there are so many other games that other people like, but I had just assumed wouldn't be engaging to me, and I'm so excited at the notion of finding another game that plays and feels and deserves all the same trust as Hollow Knight. Oh, thank God Silksong comes out tomorrow. I have been lying to you for this whole essay. Not with intent to mislead, but rather through omission, I suppose. I don't want to address it, I don't want to make a big deal out of it, but this was the hardest script I've ever written. This was my 4th script. This is my 5th time sitting down to record and clean the audio track you're listening to right now. 5 times I have sat down to spend hours of my day committing to my least favorite part of my job. I could have used the first take and had a video on Hollow Knight finished by the 18th of July, but I just couldn't do it. It wasn't good enough. There was so much I wanted to say, and I just couldn't stick the landing. Trying to say everything I wanted to say while still making a coherent video felt like an overwhelming impossibility. And while this script was hard to write because of how much there is to celebrate, that is true, greater than that struggle still, and the thing I don't want to talk about is the fact that I don't want to give you this one. It doesn't happen often, but a game occasionally comes along where I'm just not willing to make a video on it. Not because I don't like the game, but because I like it too much. And if I give it to you, then that experience, my experience, is no longer just mine. I've done it before, and I've always regretted it in some way. It's why I'll never make a video on Final Fantasy Tactics Advance. That one is just for me. And I want Hollow Knight to be that, but the only reason I played it in the first place was to fulfill a request from a funder on Patreon, so the video has to be made, and by right, it doesn't feel fair to try and keep that kind of story to myself, one that I never would have had for myself if I alone was making the calls. This whole thing began as a community project. It stayed a community project with the stream, and so it would be wrong for me to try and, I don't know, hoard it away, keep this final part from the community in turn. It's such an easy sentence to throw around. I hate it, and I know you've heard it said or read it typed in hundreds of videos and titles for videos, but Hollow Knight is a game that changed me. I know I joke about it a little from time to time, but for a really long time, I had a deeply unhealthy relationship with competitive League of Legends. It's not worth getting into right now, not with any sort of deep dissection, but it got to the point where the only place in my life that I felt actual happiness was winning a ranked game. And honestly, it was rarely even happiness. It was more so often just relief that I wasn't experiencing sadness. I quit, eventually. I've quit a few times, honestly, and I think it's finally sticking, but one of the things that came along with that, one of the things I picked up from learning to quit League was this subconscious connection that I don't think I was ever really aware of that existed in my brain between great effort required to become good at a thing, particularly a game, and a deeply unhealthy, toxic relationship with that game. If a game asked too much of me, I would subconsciously go into a defensive stance and assume that the game was toxic, that it was bad for asking that much from me. I suspect this is part of why I had such an incredibly hard time enjoying Elden Ring. It's a game that asks a lot of its players, and I'd learned to associate that with a toxic game. And I still don't enjoy Elden Ring. I still have valid distaste for the way the world of the game is laid out, the way its exploration works, and the fact that I still don't trust the game unless I have the wiki open on the second monitor, but I do adore Hollow Knight. And more than that, I trust Hollow Knight, because I was made the promise that I could, and then that promise was kept every time it was challenged. That's why I was willing to put in the effort required to get that 112%, and that changed me. Hollow Knight did something to my brain. It has adjusted the way that I think, the way that I understand games to such a degree that I no longer recognize a game or a thing requiring great effort as a toxic thing to avoid, at least not on principle. Some of these endeavors Hollow Knight faced me with on the quest for 112 were remarkably unfun in the moment, only to give me an emotional payout that I wasn't ready for or expecting, because here in the world of games, I just wasn't used to correlating incredible effort to meaningful reward. Despite the work required to do it, I was able to feel actual, real happiness, recognizing that I had both called my shot early with 112%, and also that I'd been able to see it all the way through. Getting to show people on stream why I was so confident calling the final day of the stream the final day, that being that 2 hours before the stream I had closed the door on Radiant Pure Vessel after 8 hours of practice, was pure elation. So this is why Hollow Knight is the only game I trust. Because I felt like there was something wrong with me. I felt like my appreciation for games, the way that I understand and enjoy games, was broken, and had been broken for so long and in such a way that I didn't realize anything was wrong anymore. And Hollow Knight fixed that. Oh my god, I'm so tired. Let's just get this part done with. You know, from basically every single analytical perspective that YouTube cares about, letting a video take this long is an awful idea. It really would have preferred that I just cut the cord and upload something, anything, on that July 18th original deadline, even if it wasn't a very good project. Thankfully, I don't have to answer in totality to YouTube's metrics. You know where this is going. A project like this only gets to exist because of the incredible people over on Patreon who help keep the lights on when things go wrong, which for this project was a lot. Speaking of which, I need to give a very special thank you to my executive funders over on Patreon, those being Ivan Thanosi, Daddy Biscuit 22, Jordan, Device MD, Gray 151, T.Log, Ginger Crow, William Wheatley, Comet Killer 99, and Jordy Gonzalez. These incredible people, along with everyone else who's ever made the call to help directly produce this content, are what allow my projects to exist. If you want access to all my stuff early, get behind-the-scenes stuff, get bonus content, you can find that all over on Patreon. If you just want to toss a few bucks my way to keep the lights on and feed a 40k addiction, you can do that on Ko-Fi. And if you want to join one of the greatest Discord communities on the internet, there's a link to that one down in the description. As always, thank you so much for being here.